Trade Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.
Here in episode 22, Denise Rondini joins me. She's NACFE's Communications Director and President of Rondini Communications. We talk about the importance of clear, direct communication, the best way to tell your company's story, why businesses need to control their own narratives, and offers comments on how the trucking industry is doing in its diversity efforts and in handling disruptive technologies.
Today we have joining me Denise Rondini, President of Rondini Communications, and she's also NACFE's Director of Communications. So hello, Denise. Thanks for joining me today, and this is probably a little strange being on the other side of the mic.
It's very strange, Mike, but thanks for having me.
I suppose we've been friends for, I don't know, maybe 8 or so years. I think NACFE's been around 11, and you certainly been part of almost all of it. I think you were the first person NACFE brought on as sort of an ongoing leader for us. And I recall asking NACFE's board of directors, I said, hey, does anybody know of somebody that can help us with our communications? Do you remember what happened?
So because of my background as editor of magazine in the trucking industry, I knew Kyle Treadway, who's a NACFE board member. And Kyle and I had a long history because he was a truck dealer and I was the editor of a truck dealer magazine. So I think Kyle was the one who recommended me. And we started together in May of 2014. And I started out actually just on a short-term contract to do website work for NACFE. But then I must have done a really good job because by November of that year, I was hired on a long-term contract to help with NACFE's communications. That
makes sense. I remember now. And Kyle's kind of he's a very gentlemanly guy, and he's always very professional. But I remember of all the times I've talked to Kyle, both before I started NACFE and after, he might have been as blunt with me about you as anybody or anything. He said, go get her. We need her at NACFE. But so how did you get into the career in trucking? Was it through the trucking angle or the journalism angle? Tell us about your career.
Yeah, so when I was growing up, I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but my career path was to be the next Woodward and Bernstein, which tells you a little bit about how old I am. But those jobs weren't available when I graduated from journalism school, and I moved to Chicago to discover that right around the time I got there, one of the 3 daily newspapers had closed. So while my desire had been to work on a daily newspaper, there just weren't any jobs. So I answered an ad for a blind ad for what turned out to be a construction magazine. And at that time, I didn't even know about business-to-business publications. But I went to work for a magazine called Highway and Heavy Construction, which was kind of cool because my dad was in the construction industry in a very small way, but there was some connection there. And I stayed there for 4 years, and then I heard about an opening for a full editor position on a magazine in the trucking industry. So I made the switch over to trucking back in 1982. And so that was kind of how I got into the trucking side of things.
And you just always stayed in Chicago then, huh?
Yep, I stayed in Chicago and stayed in trucking even after getting laid off in 2012 from my job as a journalist. Then I started my own communications business, Rondini Communications. And I would say today that 90% of my clients are in the trucking industry, including NACFE.
And so you've been doing this work from home or work kind of remotely for a long time, I've gathered, because there isn't really any trucking magazines based in Chicago, right?
Yeah, right. Not anymore. The ones I worked for were and then got bought by a company in Alabama. But I worked from home then. So yeah, I've been working from home for a long time. So I need 2 things to do my job: a telephone and a computer. So I can pretty much do it from anywhere.
I'm curious about this, and I'm not sure I've ever asked you this in our hundreds, if not thousands of hours talking, right? But did you know about NACFE before I contacted you? Or, if you didn't, no worries, but what was some of your first thoughts when you started working with us and understood kind of what we were to bring to the market?
Yeah, I was not aware of NACFE when I heard from you, but I think one of the things that I like about the work I do for NACFE and liked it right from the beginning is I see it as a chance for me to give back to an industry that has given a lot to me. I mean, I sort of look at my NACFE work as my legacy work just because of the kinds of things we're doing and trying to improve the industry and help people, figure out their freight efficiency and how to operate both efficiently and profitably. And so I feel like that's my give back for an industry that really has been incredibly good to me.
So I want to spend some time here talking about, sort of basic storytelling. And, because I think that's really important to not only, we see it all the time, right? Somebody has a really good idea, but if they can't share it, talk about it, make it come to life, they're probably in trouble. And we need good ideas. What do you think makes a good story? And maybe in particular a good short story, because there's a lot of articles that we put out, and that is important for these companies to tell their story. So how do you do a good story, and then maybe how do you make it short?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, you actually have to have something to say, right? So some people think that, they have to communicate on a certain cadence, and the reality is, you should just communicate when you actually have something to share with people that's meaningful, not just for your company, but to your constituents and maybe to a bigger industry. I think those are things that people want to see, that kind of connectedness. And I think you have to be genuine in the telling of the story and not, be honest about what your accomplishments are. Don't try to inflate them, and be careful about the language that you use. I jokingly say the purpose of communications is to communicate, and so it's not to impress people with the big words. It really is to get across a point, and so you need to tailor your message to the audience that you're trying to reach. You need to define that from the very beginning. Who are you trying to reach, and if you're trying to convince them of something, what it is you're trying to convince them of. So, and then just say it in as few words as possible. And I know that's really hard for people because we all went to school, and what were our writing assignments? They always had some word length to them, right? I need a 5-page paper as we got further in our education. I need a 50-page paper. And so people sort of thought that they have to write to a certain length, and my argument is you need to write till you're done saying what you need to say. And sometimes that's 50 words, and sometimes it's 500 words, and sometimes it's 5,000 words. But say what you have to say, in the most succinct language possible, and then be done with it. Don't feel like you need to go back and embellish because it's only 250 words and you wanted to write 500 words.
So do we generally go too long and try to tell too much? And so, I had a boss early in my career almost always tell me whatever I was bringing to him that, to cut it in half, whether it was a presentation or something. He's like, okay, good, Mike, but cut it in half. And I remember hearing that constantly. So is it, I'm sure everyone's different, Denise, but is it often that we talk too much, write too much, present too much?
Yeah, it's easier to write long than to write short because you don't have to be as precise in your word choice, and every word matters less when you have more words to say. So I think when you only have 300 words, you have to very carefully choose the exact right word to use. And so I think that's a challenge for a lot of people that people just it's easier to write long. Writing short, believe it or not, is much harder.
Yeah, I get that. But I think it back to your point around making your story heard, the simpler and the shorter probably is really, really good advice. Over your career, I think, and we're about the same age. We got similar lengths of our career. Now with the internet and so forth, everybody can be a reporter, right? Everybody can publish with a blog or with even a post or something. So do you see people, or do you cringe every day at people jumping too quick to put stuff out there? What's the dangers of that, not having maybe somebody look over their shoulders, or even taking some time to think about what they're putting out there? Any advice there for all of us?
Yeah, I think because everybody knows how to write to some extent, everybody fancies themselves a writer, and it is a skill, and some of us are more skilled at that than others, but I don't think people look at it that way. Everyone's like, well, I've written papers before, so I can write. And I think people tend to get caught up in not using clear language and in using jargon, lots of acronyms being thrown around that they assume that other people understand, which I think is a common mistake that people make, that we assume everybody has the same knowledge base that we do, and that's not true, right? So the clearer we can be and the more we can explain and not try to act like we have like some secret society with special words that we use, and every industry has them, but I think a good writer makes sure that whoever picks up our piece will be able to understand it and won't feel like they're on the outside because we're using language they can't understand.
You've covered the trucking industry a lot, and you've probably been to a lot of press conferences. And I remember I had a little experience with press conferences back when I was at Navistar, and here at NACFE we do a lot of them because we're putting out such information. So, and you've given us some good things to think about around press conferences, whether they're trucking events or phone calls or now Zoom. What separates a good press event from a bad one in your experience?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the same thing that makes a good piece of writing good, is like having actual news to share. I think people get caught up because, especially when editors are on one place, like at a trucking show, people think, oh, they're all here. Let's get them. They're already here, so let's get them together. But I sat through too many press conferences where you end up leaving shaking your head about, why was I here? There was no new news. Might be something minor like, well, this year the widget's on the left side of the engine and last year it was on the right side of the engine. So I think you need to, when you gather people together, make sure that what you have to say is actually something, a big announcement. Smaller announcements can be handled through press releases or emails, but when you gather people together, make sure that you have something of importance to say. And then, don't just read from the press release to them, have something to add to what you're already going to hand them, in the written press release. Have some additional information. Have experts there who can answer questions, and be open with them when they ask a question. Don't try to jazz them with marketing speak, but speak to them about the reality of either if you're doing a product, what your product can do, or you're going into some program, what you hope to accomplish, and what you anticipate some pitfalls might be.
Today, speed, editing and reporting speed. I mean, you and I've chatted about this before, 10, 20 years ago, you went to a press event, maybe as an editor, and then you wrote the article on the plane home, or the following week, you had some time, to do it. Now with everything so rushed, I see the editors writing their story while I'm up there on the podium talking and taking pictures themselves and all that. So what are the latest dynamics? Put us in your shoes when you're out there, or someone from any of these magazines, or how do you do your work at or after a press event?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think we do see people just, writing stuff on the fly, and that I think one of the things we've lost in this, we have to post something immediately, is kind of the analysis. I think we see less of that maybe, and more kind of just reporting on what was announced rather than digging in a little deeper. We see some of it, and I would like to see more of it, because I think that's where the real benefit to the industry comes in, is if the editors can look past just the surface of the announcement and make a connection, from a variety of things they've seen going on. But, the reality is they're under pressure to write a story, tweet during the event, put something on Facebook, take a video. So it's the job of the editor is like so different when I was an editor, where we would just go and write stuff. Now it's, they have to have photography skills and video skills and all of this other stuff. So their jobs have become incredibly intense. So I think anything that somebody who's given a press event can do to make their jobs easier is a benefit.
Yeah, and so maybe that's good for us to think about those companies that are preparing information for the press event. Maybe get them the artwork ahead of time, some of the graphics ahead of time. Know that they're going to be extremely pressed for time, and maybe help out with that some. One real challenge that I learned kind of the hard way, and then over time, is when there's been times where I've been up at the podium, and I've seen this with other press events as well, where there are no questions, and maybe it's because it wasn't all that newsworthy, or do sometimes editors not want to ask a question because they're worried that they'll kind of, I know this isn't hot celebrity gossip news here, but do they ever worry that by asking a question they might tip their hat as to kind of an angle they're doing in a story? And if there are no questions, so if you're a manufacturer and you have a press event and there are absolutely no questions, is there some tricks to handle that better? Than I've seen some actually be kind of failures.
Yeah, I mean, just because there's no questions doesn't mean that it was a bad press event. Like, it could be like you're the 15th press conference they've been to in 4 or 5 hours, and it could just be like they're just exhausted. It could be that you did such a good job of presenting your material that there aren't any questions, or it could be that they want to speak to you privately. So I think it's always good at the end of a press event to make sure the people presenting and other people on staff are around to answer questions and to make themselves accessible to the editors in case they do want to add. They may be working on a story that's, and they heard something in your remarks that they want to use in a different story, not necessarily to report about what took place at the press conference. So I don't think you should take it personally. It could be for a number of reasons why there aren't any questions, and sometimes it is that there was no story there, and so there's no questions to ask. But I think just if there are no questions, just make sure that you're kind of on the available and milling around after the event in case people have questions.
Yeah, one thing I did once that really worked well, I've probably done it many more times, is, probably you advised me to bring an expert along. So, I may have a fleet leader along with me or something. And if there are no questions, I'll just ask the person the expert I brought a question. And then sometimes that kicks off and starts to gain some more questions, or at least gives someone else a chance to talk. Any advice you'd have for, company executives with respect to the communications groups, inside of their companies? I know that's always, a challenging part of all this.
Yeah, I think one of the things is there are several well-known companies in the trucking industry who almost never want to go on the record. And I think that's a big mistake because your story's going to get told, the narrative's going to happen. And to me, I want to be in control of the narrative. There's an old saying that says, until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. And I think that means if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to tell it for you, right? And they're going to tell it in a way that makes you look bad or that makes them look better. So I think executives who shy away from going on the record aren't doing their companies any favors. I mean, I don't think you want to give away your company secrets, but there's not as many secrets in King as people would like us to think there are. We all have access to similar information. So I think it's just engaging in the industry that you're in and recognizing that the media is part of the trucking industry. They're not the enemy of the trucking industry. These editors who are in trucking now, many of them have been in it for many years. Many of them have their commercial driver's license, so they're aware of what it's like to drive a truck. They're not out here to pillory anybody. They're really here. I mean, business journalism is different than, what the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune does, right? It's really a much more advocacy kind of relationship. So people who don't want to speak to the media, the trucking media, I don't think are doing themselves any favors.
Yeah, and I would echo that it's a great group of people, and there are new people coming to the trucking press all the time, but there are obviously some that have been in it a long time, and it is one where if you're upfront and honest, they'll help you tell your story really well. So that's good advice. Hey, we got a little bit of time yet, and I want to get into a couple of more subjects. I want to talk about diversity in trucking, and then a little bit about your thoughts around how ready this industry is for a lot of technology change. But let's start with diversity. This is traditionally a real male-dominated business when it starts from truck drivers all the way up through the ranks. And just in your experience, I mean, how are we doing as an industry around diversity, and particularly with being, exciting, inviting, and taking advantage of the skills that women bring to any of these jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're making progress. We've certainly come a long way since 1982, when I literally remember being the only woman at an event. So we have made progress. I think we're making progress more quickly now. I think the whole, diversity and inclusion, equity issue is now being raised. People are big corporations are dedicating positions, high-level positions, diversity officers or, whole departments to it, and recognizing that there is a value to the organization to have a diverse workforce. It's more creative, better at problem solving, and the younger generation is insisting on this. I mean, this is one of the things that they're very passionate about. So I think trucking is making progress. I mean, you still go to meetings, and there's still way too many of us with gray hair, men and women, and there's still probably too many men, and there's probably still too many men at the very highest levels of the organization. But we're starting to see that, more women being appointed to lots of positions higher up the ranks of a corporation. And as you said, you've had some of them on your podcast, so we're seeing some of it. There's still work to be done, but I think we're making good progress.
Yeah, and I think I think we're making progress through the ranks in trucking. But one of the things that made me feel real good last year is when we did that high school mathematics challenge, and there were so many women in math, or young girls, young women in high school that were interested in mathematics and engineering and technology, and they viewed the project or the problem we gave them on trucking as exciting and interesting, and electric trucks, and traditionally they may not have been there, and then once given a trucking problem they wouldn't have seen it for them. So that's really cool. And then the second area is around technology. So I know your background is in service and parts, and wow, there's a lot of technology coming with the old parts catalogs and the service books and all that. I mean, they're all gone with 3D and video training and all kinds of really cool stuff, as well as the truck's going to start telling the service organizations, hey, I'm about ready to break down, get me in, sort of like somebody calling a doctor when they're sick. And then there's the electrification and hydrogen and automation, and so there's days where I think, man, we're not ready at all, and this is going to just steamroll us, or we're going to miss opportunities with new technologies. And other times I kind of think we're ready. From your kind of chair, Denise, how do you see the industry being ready for this? And is some of the technologies easier or harder?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time to be in trucking. I think it's really going to be an exciting time for us to attract new people, because we're doing stuff now that's cool, right? I mean, that's perceived by other people as cool. I always thought trucks were cool once I got into it, but I think the electrification of trucking and automation and the use of technology in trucks, and even the electronics on a diesel engine, I think all of that stuff is exciting for people. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot to take in, but we have some really bright minds, and to your point about the STEM kids from the math modeling challenge, we have young people who were trying to get interested in this and who are interested in it. And, maybe the silver lining to COVID is that the image of trucking got raised in the minds of the general public. People realized how vital trucking is to the economy. And so I think this is like a perfect time for all of this, for us to tell the story of how we're helping the future, how trucking is going to help the future be greener, which, again, is something that I think most people want to see. So I'm really excited about it. Will we miss some stuff? Will there be some stumbles? Sure. I think all in all, we'll be in a great place. We are in a great place to right now with all of what's going on.
Very good. Very good. Well, yeah, we're kind of running out of time. If you're in communications or, even an executive or others that get, in press conferences or deal with articles, this time with Denise has gone fast. So I'd encourage you to listen again, listen a second time. There's some really good thoughts that she brings to help you tell your stories better and get more value out of your communications. As we kind of wrap up here, Denise, any final thoughts, or can you distill it down to a few things that would help us, really, whether we're a company or an individual, how can we tell our own stories better? What's your sort of big points?
Yeah, I mean, I think in just a few words, be clear and be direct. Don't try to paint something as perfect. None of what we do is perfect. Right? So talk about the benefits of something and the challenges of it, and use language that's understandable by everybody. And then, don't be afraid to answer hard questions when you get asked those questions, either by journalists or by other people in your constituency. That would be my big advice.
Great. That's really helpful. So thanks for being on the show, Denise, and it's truly an honor to have you on our team at NACFE, and best to you.
Thanks for having me.
Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.